The restaurant was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the steady hum of conversations that made it feel alive. Waiters weaved through tables, balancing trays filled with plates of food, and waitresses offered polite smiles as they hurried to meet every customer's need. Among them was a young woman named Claire, a hardworking waitress who had been at the job long enough to know the regulars and anticipate their orders before they even asked. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't someone who turned heads with glamour, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Claire depended on this job to pay her rent, cover her mother's medical bills, and keep her little brother in school. Every shift mattered. Every dollar mattered. That night, everything seemed normal, until the whispers started. A table of wealthy guests, dressed in designer suits and sparkling jewelry, suddenly claimed something had gone missing. A diamond bracelet worth more than Claire would make in a year. Eyes darted around the room, but they landed quickly on her. The accusations came fast, sharp, and cruel. They didn't point fingers at anyone else, just her, the waitress who had been serving them all night. Claire stood frozen, her hands trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She denied it, of course, her voice shaking, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. To the wealthy guests, she was guilty before she could even defend herself. The manager rushed over, clearly panicked. The restaurant's reputation was at stake, and he didn't want to upset such influential customers. Claire pleaded with him to believe her, but the pressure in the air was suffocating. Some staff members exchanged uneasy glances, others stepped back as if to distance themselves from her. She felt completely alone, cornered in a storm she hadn't caused. Tears pricked her eyes, but she held her ground, determined not to break down in front of them. Then, something unexpected happened. At a table nearby sat a man who had been quietly observing everything. He wasn't just any man. He was a billionaire known for his sharp mind and keen sense of justice. His presence in the restaurant had gone almost unnoticed, but now all eyes turned when he slowly stood up. The room went silent. He looked directly at the wealthy guests and then at the manager before speaking in a calm but commanding voice that carried across the room. "Before you accuse this young woman of something so serious," he said, "I want to see the cameras." The statement shocked everyone. Guests gasped, staff members froze, and the accusers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Claire's eyes widened, a spark of hope flickering in the middle of her fear. No one had expected him to get involved, let alone demand proof. The tension grew heavier with each second of silence that followed. The manager hesitated, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, while the wealthy guests exchanged nervous looks. Why would they be worried, unless there was more to the story than anyone realized? Claire stood there, her breath caught in her throat, waiting for what would come next. And as the cameras were about to be checked, the truth that would soon be revealed had the power to change everything. For her, for them, and for the billionaire who had just stepped into her defense. The restaurant staff and customers all turned toward the manager, waiting to see what he would do. The billionaire's words had cut through the chaos like a blade, and now there was no escaping the request. Claire could feel her heart thudding in her chest, each beat louder than the next. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified. What if the cameras somehow failed to clear her? What if something went wrong? She knew she hadn't taken the bracelet, but the thought of her whole future hanging on the flicker of a security feed made her knees weak. The wealthy woman who had raised the accusation pressed her lips together tightly. Her husband leaned in, whispering something in her ear, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. They had walked in with confidence, certain their claim would be enough to condemn Claire. After all, who would believe a waitress over them? But the billionaire's demand changed everything. His reputation was known in the city. He wasn't a man to be argued with lightly. His calm tone carried authority, and his presence made the entire room feel like it was waiting for a verdict. Claire's mind drifted back for a moment, remembering the struggles that had led her here. Her father had left years ago, leaving her mother to raise her and her brother alone. When her mother's health began to fail, Claire had no choice but to step into the role of provider. Working long shifts, sacrificing her own dreams of school, and doing whatever it took to keep her small family afloat. She had never stolen anything in her life. The idea of being accused of theft felt like a cruel joke. And yet here she was, with strangers ready to destroy her reputation in a single night. The manager finally cleared his throat. "Of course," he said nervously. "We do have cameras installed." His eyes darted from the billionaire to the guests who had made the complaint. He seemed torn, caught between fear of upsetting his wealthy patrons and the pressure of ignoring the powerful man now insisting on proof. He gestured to a young employee to check the surveillance room. A heavy silence followed as everyone seemed to hold their breath. The billionaire returned to his seat, but his eyes stayed fixed on the accusers. Claire noticed how calm he seemed, almost as if he already knew how this would play out. She couldn't understand why someone like him would care about her situation, but in that moment, he was the only person standing between her and ruin. The wealthy woman fidgeted with her napkin, glancing at the door where the employee had disappeared to review the footage. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence slipping. Claire noticed the subtle changes, the tightening of their expressions, the way their voices grew softer as they whispered to each other. Something about their reaction didn't feel right. The minutes dragged on, every second heavier than the last. Claire felt sweat on her palms as she tried to stay steady. Guests at other tables whispered among themselves, some sympathetic toward her, others curious to see the drama unfold. A few even pulled out their phones, though no one dared speak too loudly with the billionaire's watchful presence in the room. When the employee finally returned, his face was pale, his hands clutching a small device. He leaned in to whisper something to the manager, who stiffened immediately. The color drained from his face. All eyes locked on him as he swallowed hard, clearly shaken by whatever he had just learned. Claire's heart leapt into her throat. Was this it? Was her name about to be cleared, or was something darker about to unfold? The manager looked torn apart, caught between his duty and the fear of what the footage had shown. His voice shook as he tried to speak, but the billionaire raised a hand, steady and commanding. "Show us," he said simply. And with that, the entire restaurant seemed to lean forward, waiting for the truth that had been hiding in plain sight, about to be revealed. The screen flickered to life, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. The footage began playing, the grainy black and white images showing the table where the wealthy guests had been sitting. Claire's hands tightened around her apron as she watched herself appear on the screen, carrying drinks, delivering food, smiling politely despite the exhaustion in her eyes. The video played back her every movement, and for the first time since the accusation, she felt a strange sense of safety. Proof that she had done nothing wrong was right there in front of everyone. But as the footage continued, something strange happened. The bracelet was clearly visible on the woman's wrist at the start of the meal. She gestured with it, even lifted her glass with her hand tilted just enough for the sparkle of the diamonds to catch the light. Yet as the night went on, the camera caught her sliding her hand beneath the table, whispering something to her husband, who gave her a knowing look. The bracelet seemed to vanish right after that moment. The footage didn't show Claire touching the table, nor even going close enough to have the opportunity to take it. Gasps rippled through the room as the scene played out. The wealthy woman's face turned pale, her husband stiffening in his chair. Still, she quickly composed herself, lifting her chin with defiance. "That doesn't prove anything," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the air. "The cameras don't show everything. She could have taken it when our attention was elsewhere." The billionaire leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing as though studying her every word. "Or perhaps," he said calmly, "there's something you don't want us to see." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, enough to make the woman's hands tremble slightly as she adjusted her napkin again. Claire stood frozen, torn between relief and fear. Relief that the cameras didn't show her doing anything wrong. Fear that the accusation wasn't going to disappear as easily as she hoped. She could feel the crowd's eyes on her, but also on the guests who had accused her. For the first time, their story no longer sounded convincing. The manager looked visibly shaken. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. It was about the reputation of his restaurant, about wealthy customers who had influence in the city, and about the billionaire whose word could change everything for the business. He wiped his forehead nervously, muttering something about misunderstandings, but no one seemed ready to let it drop. Meanwhile, whispers began among the other guests. Some speculated that the bracelet had never really been stolen, that it was all a setup meant to humiliate the waitress. Others suggested that the couple might have been hiding something far bigger than just a piece of jewelry. The tension in the air shifted. Suspicion now spread in multiple directions. Claire's co-worker Mia, who had been quietly watching from a distance, stepped closer and whispered, "Claire, this doesn't feel right. I've seen that woman here before. She always makes trouble, always wants special treatment. What if this was planned?" Claire's stomach tightened. Planned. But why target her? Why tonight? She wanted to ask Mia more, but the room's attention was fixed on the billionaire, who had leaned forward again. His calm eyes locked on the accusers. "If you have nothing to hide," he said softly, "then you won't mind if we watch the rest of the footage." The woman's face drained of color. Her husband shifted in his chair again, looking as if he wanted to speak but stopped himself. For the first time, cracks were beginning to show in their confidence. Claire's heart raced. Something deeper was happening here. This wasn't just about a bracelet or a false accusation anymore. It felt like she had been pulled into a conflict much larger than herself, one that involved power, reputation, and secrets she couldn't yet see. And as the footage rolled forward, everyone in the room leaned closer, waiting for the truth to crawl out from the shadows. The footage rolled on, and the restaurant grew so silent that even the faint hum of the air conditioner felt loud. Every eye was glued to the screen. Claire could see herself in the background of the video, moving between tables, checking on customers, doing her job exactly as she always did. But the focus was on the wealthy couple. The woman kept fidgeting with her hands, sliding them under the table, whispering to her husband in hurried tones. Her husband glanced around nervously more than once, as though making sure no one was watching too closely. Then came the moment that made everyone in the room lean forward. The woman shifted in her seat, her hand disappearing into her designer handbag. She looked straight at her husband, who gave her a slight nod. A few seconds later, she pulled her hand out and adjusted her napkin again, acting as though nothing had happened. But the bracelet that had been sparkling on her wrist earlier was now gone. The camera caught enough of the angle to raise questions, though it wasn't perfectly clear what she had done. Gasps spread through the crowd. People began whispering louder now, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The woman's face flushed red, but she lifted her chin stubbornly, as if daring anyone to accuse her outright. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "This is ridiculous. Cameras don't catch everything. That waitress could have been clever about it. We all know these things happen." Claire's chest tightened with anger. She wanted to shout, to tell the whole room that she had done nothing wrong, but her voice caught in her throat. She looked at the billionaire, who was still watching silently, his eyes sharper than ever. He hadn't said much, but every time he spoke, the entire room hung on his words. He leaned back in his chair now, his fingers steepled together as though he were piecing a puzzle no one else could see. The manager was sweating heavily, his eyes darting from the billionaire to the couple, then back to Claire. His business was crumbling in front of him. A scandal like this could ruin the restaurant's reputation overnight. Yet he seemed too afraid to confront the wealthy guests directly. He stammered something about letting the matter go, but no one paid him any attention. The customers weren't leaving. They wanted to see what happened next. Mia, Claire's co-worker, moved closer again and whispered urgently, "Claire, this doesn't look like just a mistake. It's almost like they wanted you to be the scapegoat. Why would they do that?" Her words sent a chill down Claire's spine. She had thought this was just a cruel, baseless accusation, but now the idea that it had been intentional, that she had been targeted, terrified her. The billionaire finally broke the silence. "If the cameras don't capture enough," he said firmly, Then let's check the bags. His words cut through the air like a blade. The wealthy woman's eyes widened, and for a brief second, her mask of confidence cracked. Her husband reached out quickly, placing a hand on her wrist as though to stop her from reacting. The restaurant buzzed louder now. Some guests leaned over their tables, whispering in excitement, while others stared openly, waiting for the confrontation. Claire felt her pulse racing. If they opened those bags, the truth, whatever it was, would be undeniable. But she also sensed that this was no ordinary theft accusation. The couple's nervous energy, the billionaire's unwavering focus, and the way the manager seemed almost desperate to avoid pushing too hard all hinted at something bigger. The tension rose to a breaking point. The couple sat frozen, the billionaire's eyes locked on them, and Claire felt the weight of the entire room pressing down. The truth was hanging in the balance, seconds away from being forced into the light. And in that moment, as silence fell once more, everyone in the restaurant knew they were standing at the edge of a revelation that would change everything. The silence after the billionaire's demand felt like it stretched forever. All eyes stayed fixed on the wealthy couple, who looked as if the walls were closing in on them. The woman's lips parted as though she wanted to protest, but her husband's grip on her wrist tightened. It was a subtle motion, but enough for the billionaire to notice. His sharp gaze shifted between the two of them, reading their unease like an open book. Before anyone could move toward the handbags, the manager's phone buzzed loudly on the counter. He glanced at the screen, and his face instantly drained of color. His hands shook slightly as he silenced the call, trying to hide it, but the billionaire caught the detail. "Answer it," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. The manager hesitated, his lips twitching nervously before reluctantly stepping away to take the call. Claire's heart pounded harder. Something about the manager's reaction felt off, almost as if he knew more than he was admitting. She looked at Mia, who whispered, "Claire, I don't think this is just about the bracelet anymore." Moments later, the manager returned, looking pale and shaken. He muttered something about a misunderstanding, and tried to divert attention away from the handbags. "Perhaps we should let the matter rest," he stammered. But the billionaire stood up again, his presence commanding every pair of eyes in the room. "No," he said firmly. "If the waitress has been accused, then the truth must be shown. Otherwise, this isn't about justice, it's about protecting lies." The crowd erupted in whispers again, but before the handbags could be opened, the second twist struck like a thunderclap. The young employee who had brought the footage rushed back into the room, his face pale with panic. He clutched another USB drive in his hand and whispered frantically to the billionaire. The billionaire took it, slid it into the restaurant's screen, and suddenly, another angle from the cameras appeared, one the manager had not shown earlier. The footage revealed something shocking. It wasn't just the woman slipping her hand into her bag. It was the manager himself, sneaking toward the table when the couple was distracted, his hand brushing near the floor where something shiny had dropped. He picked it up quickly, slipping it into his pocket before hurrying away. Gasps filled the room again, louder this time. Claire felt her breath catch. Her eyes darted between the couple, who looked stunned, and the manager, whose face turned crimson. For a moment, no one knew what to think. Was the couple trying to frame her? Was the manager working with them? Or had he been trying to manipulate the situation for reasons no one yet understood? The billionaire's eyes darkened as he studied the footage again. "So," he said slowly, "it seems this story is much larger than a missing bracelet." His words hung heavy in the air, sparking a new wave of whispers and speculation. Claire's knees felt weak, but she stood tall. The accusation had been enough to almost ruin her, and now it was clear there were layers of deception stacked against her. The room no longer felt like just a restaurant. It felt like a stage for a drama that went far beyond her control. The couple stayed frozen, clearly rattled, while the manager fumbled for words. His voice cracked as he tried to explain, but the billionaire raised a hand, silencing him. The crowd leaned in, hungry for the truth, but no answers came yet. And as the footage paused on the manager's guilty expression, the restaurant held its breath. What had started as a simple theft accusation was unraveling into something much deeper, and Claire realized she was caught in the middle of a storm that was only growing stronger. The stakes were no longer just about her job. They were about secrets powerful enough to destroy reputations, and the night was far from over. The room felt like it was trembling with tension. The footage froze on the image of the manager's hand slipping something into his pocket, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything Claire had ever experienced. For a moment no one moved. Then the billionaire turned slowly toward the manager. His eyes calm but piercing. "You have one chance," he said softly, "to explain what we all just saw." The manager's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked around the restaurant, desperate for support but found none. The wealthy couple stared at him in disbelief, realizing for the first time that their own plan, whatever it had been, had just been tangled with his. Claire felt her breath catch. So it had all been connected. The false accusation, the missing bracelet, and now the manager's hidden involvement. Finally the manager stammered. It wasn't what it looked like. I found the bracelet on the floor. I didn't want a scene. I thought." His words trailed off as the billionaire leaned closer, his voice cutting through. "You thought you could use this to your advantage. You thought no one would question you while a young woman's life was being ruined." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's chest tightened, the weight of the accusation slowly lifting as the truth came into view. But before relief could settle, another twist came. The young employee who had brought the extra footage stepped forward, his voice shaking. "That's not all," he said, his eyes flicking nervously toward the billionaire. "There's more." A fresh clip played on the screen. This time, the angle showed the wealthy couple earlier in the evening, sliding a small envelope across the bar toward the manager. He glanced inside, nodded subtly, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The crowd erupted in disbelief. Claire's stomach dropped. It hadn't just been the couple framing her, and it hadn't just been the manager acting alone. It was both of them working together, weaving a scheme for reasons no one could quite yet piece together. The billionaire stood tall, his voice steady but commanding. So this was never about a bracelet. It was about control, about humiliation, about using someone who couldn't fight back. His eyes moved to Claire, softening slightly, before returning to the three guilty faces before him. "But you underestimated her. And you underestimated the truth." The manager's knees buckled, and the couple's defiance finally cracked. The woman's face twisted in anger, her voice shrill. "Do you know who we are?" she snapped. But no one cared. The other guests were already pulling out their phones, recording everything, eager to see justice play out in real time. Claire felt tears sting her eyes. The nightmare she had been living for what felt like hours was unraveling, but just as relief began to wash over her, the billionaire added one last blow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim folder. With practiced calm, he opened it and laid down several photographs on the nearest table. The entire restaurant gasped. The photos showed the wealthy couple and the manager together at another high-end restaurant weeks earlier, caught on surveillance, orchestrating a nearly identical scene. Another innocent worker had been accused, another life disrupted. This wasn't their first time. Claire's breath caught. Her body trembled as she realized how close she had come to being destroyed by people who had been playing this game for far too long. But thanks to the billionaire, their scheme had finally been exposed. The climax erupted in cheers and outrage from the guests, phones flashing as proof was captured. The guilty trio stood cornered, their power stripped away in a single night. And though the weight of the accusation had nearly broken her, Claire knew one thing for certain. Her life had just changed forever. But as the billionaire met her eyes with a knowing look, one last thought lingered in her mind. Why had he chosen to help her? And how did he already have those photographs? The answer, she realized, might be a twist she wasn't ready for. The restaurant felt different after the truth came out. The tension that had gripped the air melted into murmurs of disbelief, anger, and relief. The wealthy couple and the manager stood speechless, their arrogance shattered, while the guests who had once been silent now spoke up without fear. Phones recorded every detail, ensuring their scheme would not be hidden in the shadows again. Claire stood at the center of it all, her chest still rising and falling with uneven breaths, hardly able to process that the nightmare she had walked into was finally over. The billionaire closed the folder of photographs with calm precision, his presence steady and unshaken. He didn't raise his voice or gloat in triumph. He simply allowed the truth to speak for itself. Turning to Claire, he gave her a reassuring nod, the kind of gesture that didn't need words to convey respect. She wasn't just a waitress anymore in that moment. She was a woman who had endured injustice and refused to be broken by it. The authorities were quickly called, and the couple, along with the manager, were led away. Their protests fell flat, drowned out by the evidence that spoke louder than their excuses. Guests applauded quietly, some even stepping forward to comfort Claire, assuring her that they had believed her all along. For the first time that night, her tears flowed freely, not from fear but from relief. Mia wrapped her arm around her, whispering, "You did it, Claire. You stood strong." Claire smiled faintly, though she knew she hadn't done it alone. Her eyes drifted back to the billionaire, who was preparing to leave as quietly as he had stepped into the chaos. She couldn't let him go without asking. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. He paused, turning back toward her. There was no grand speech, no elaborate explanation, just a simple truth. "Because I know what it's like to be judged unfairly," he said. His eyes held hers for a moment longer before he walked away, leaving behind more questions than answers. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, though nothing truly felt the same. Claire was offered apologies, not only from the staff but from strangers who promised to share her story so no one would ever believe she was guilty again. The manager's departure left an opening, and though it was unexpected, the owner later approached Claire with an offer to take on a supervisory role. For the first time, she wouldn't just be surviving shift to shift. She would have a chance to build something better. Later that night, as she walked home with Mia by her side, Claire thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the cruelty of being accused, the fear of losing everything she worked for, and the miracle of a stranger stepping in at the exact moment she needed it most. She didn't know why fate had chosen her to cross paths with someone so powerful, but she understood one thing clearly: the truth has a way of rising, even when lies try to bury it. Her story became more than just a tale of a missing bracelet. It became a reminder of resilience, of standing tall when the world tries to push you down, and of the power of compassion from unexpected places. Claire never forgot that night, not because of the pain it caused, but because of the hope it gave her. And though the billionaire vanished back into his own world, leaving only questions and quiet gratitude behind, Claire carried his words with her. They were proof that even in the darkest moments, there is always someone willing to see beyond appearances and fight for what is right. That night closed a painful chapter in her life, but it also opened a new one where she no longer saw herself as just a waitress accused of theft, but as someone stronger, braver, and ready to face whatever came next.